No one knew that a mother would be a significant reason for her son's dismal life and cause irreversible loss to the family. Linda is 48-year-old housewife. She always felt a sense of unease that she couldn't shake despite the seemingly perfect life she had built. Her husband, Brian, was a corporate executive who traveled often, leaving her ample time to focus on their only son, Tim. Tim was her pride and joy, a hard-working university medical student. For Linda, Tim was everything. From when Tim was born, Linda felt an overwhelming rush of love, unlike anything she had ever experienced. He was her miracle, a precious gift she had waited for. She looked at his tiny face and made a promise right then and there. She would always protect him. As Tim grew, so did Linda's obsession with ensuring his safety and happiness. She was the mom who sterilized his bottles twice, triple-checked the safety locks, and refused to let him play outside without a litany of preventive measures. When he started school, Linda was there every step of the way, volunteering for classroom activities, dominating PTA meetings, and hovering over playdates. It was all done under the guise of love, a love that was increasingly tinged with possessiveness. As Tim entered high school, the world outside began to beckon, but Linda tightened her grip. She discouraged friendships she deemed unsuitable, subtly manipulating Tim's social calendar to ensure he was always within her orbit. Tim was a teenager, and like all teenagers, he wanted to explore and take risks. But Linda was always there, casting her shadow, a constant surveillance that signaled danger where there was none. By the time Tim reached university, he was academically stellar, but socially cautious and reticent to form connections. Linda took this as a victory. She saw his reserved demeanor as a sign that he was still her little boy, reliant on her, and not yet swayed by the corrupting influences she so feared. Little did she know that her constant hovering had not safeguarded Tim, but stifled him, leaving him ill-equipped to navigate the complexities of adult relationships. Years flew by, and Tim fell in love with Rachel. Tim met Rachel during a campus event dedicated to the intersection of science and art. It was a setting neither of them expected to find romance in. Tim was there to present a paper on neurology, and Rachel was showcasing an abstract art piece inspired by mental health. Their booths were adjacent, juxtaposing two worlds that rarely intersected: the clinical precision of medicine and the boundless imagination of art. Rachel caught Tim's eye immediately. She was a burst of color in a sea of academic grays and blues. Her hair was a wavy cascade of chestnut locks, her eyes a captivating shade of green, and her smile, oh, that smile, could light up an entire room. She wore a flowy sundress with vibrant hues, representing her free spirit. As for Rachel, she found Tim intriguing, a puzzle waiting to be solved. He was reserved, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look older than he was. But his eyes caught her, the warmth in them, a softness contradicting his otherwise serious demeanor. Initially, their conversation was awkward, punctuated by polite laughter and the obligatory exchange of compliments about each other's work. But as they started talking, something clicked. They started seeing more of each other, first under the guise of interdisciplinary study, but soon the pretense disappeared. They were drawn to each other, two souls finding a connection in a disconnected world. Their dates were an eclectic mix of art shows, medical symposiums, and long walks where they discussed everything from Picasso to neuroscience. It was a whirlwind romance that felt like a lifetime in the making. Linda's instincts followed this new relationship long before Tim told her. He started coming home late, a spring in his step, a sense of euphoria she hadn't seen in years. And when he finally told her about Rachel, her heart sank. For Linda, Rachel was not just a threat because she was the woman her son loved, but because she represented a world Linda couldn't understand, one filled with emotional risks and uncertainties. Tim was in love, and for the first time, he felt genuinely living, experiencing a facet of life that his mother's overprotectiveness had long denied him. But the collision course was set, and the repercussions would be felt for years. Rachel was an art student, lively and free-spirited, her personality the antithesis of Linda's. Linda couldn't take it when Tim announced he planned to marry Rachel after graduation. She considered Rachel an imminent threat, someone who would steal Tim away, forever shattering the small, secure world Linda had created. Linda's over-possessiveness didn't start when Tim met Rachel. It had been festering for years. Tim remembered playdates being mysteriously canceled as a young boy, and sleepovers suddenly disallowed. He didn't think much of it then, attributing it to his mom being overly protective. Little did he know, it was Linda's way of monopolizing his time. Her possessiveness manifested in subtler ways, too. She had an uncanny knack for showing up at school events uninvited, looming at the back, watching every interaction Tim had with his friends, especially with girls. Tim would often find her sitting alone at home, scrolling through the social media accounts of his friends, occasionally muttering things like, "She doesn't look like the right kind of influence." The first time Tim brought Rachel home, Linda was sweetness incarnate, but only on the surface. Underneath her smiles and courteous exchanges, she scrutinized Rachel's every move, dissected her words, and analyzed her behavior. The family dinner felt like an interrogation room for Rachel, although Linda never asked overtly uncomfortable questions. Instead, she dropped underhanded comments, subtle digs meant to unsettle. "Medicine is such a stable career. It's good that someone will be the breadwinner, given that art isn't a real job. Isn't that right, Rachel?" she would say, casting doubt over Rachel's life choices without even the pretense of subtlety. Whenever Tim would spend time with Rachel, Linda would conveniently fall sick, often calling him and complaining about vague symptoms. "I don't want to be a burden," she'd say, laden with implied guilt. "But it's so hard being alone." This tactic would make Tim rush home, leaving Rachel alone and bewildered. She did everything to alienate Tim from Rachel, but failed, and Tim insisted on getting married to the love of his life. Thinking all the time that Rachel would snatch away her son, she felt compelled to take action. She started planting the seeds of doubt wherever she could. She'd whisper to Brian about how incompatible Rachel seemed, how different her world was from theirs, trying to amplify any existing cultural and social gaps. Linda even went as far as to create fake emails from an anonymous sender, warning Tim that Rachel had been seen with another man. Nothing worked as per her planning, and the day arrived when they announced their marriage. The wedding day loomed, and despite Linda's manipulations, the plans went ahead. On the big day, as Rachel walked down the aisle towards a beaming Tim, Linda knew it was now or never. In a moment of dramatic flair, she faked a fainting spell, collapsing right there in the church. The ceremony was halted, ambulances were called, and Linda was taken to the hospital. She had already made a plan with the help of her friend, who was a doctor in a nearby hospital. When she reached there, her friend started doing drama, declaring her critically ill. All the family members got worried, and different tests were performed. During this saga, the marriage ceremony was called off. Being critically sick, Linda was suggested to rest completely, and the doctor advised Tim not to give her tension by doing anything she did not like. Following the instructions, Tim canceled his marriage, started caring for his mother, and slowly stopped talking to Rachel. Rachel was devastated. Her dream of a life with Tim was shattered. And just like that, Linda got her wish. Years passed, and Tim never remarried, opting to drown himself in his work. The light in his eyes slowly dimmed, and he became a shadow of his former self. Brian grew distant, plunging himself into his job to escape the growing discontent at home. Linda, however, seemed satisfied. Her son was right where she wanted him, with her. But life has a way of exposing hidden truths. Brian had always considered himself a reasonably observant husband. But even he had limits to how much he could see, especially regarding Linda's intricate web of manipulations. It was a typical Saturday, and he was searching for some old tax documents in the attic. The attic was more Linda's domain than his. She kept old family mementos, Tim's childhood drawings, and boxes filled with memorabilia. Amidst the boxes labeled Christmas decorations, baby clothes, and family albums, one nondescript box caught his eye. It was shoved into the far corner, partially obscured by a stack of old blankets. Unlike the other boxes, this one had no label. Curiosity piqued, Brian pulled the box out and opened it. He first saw medical documents, doctor's letters, test reports, prescriptions, all under Linda's name. At first glance, they seemed to correspond with the period around Tim's planned wedding. He found it odd, but thought it might be another box of household records until he started reading them closely. Brian's face went white as he pieced together what he was seeing. The medical reports contradicted each other in diagnosis and recommended treatments. Some were printed on letterheads from doctors who, upon a quick internet search, he found had no record of treating Linda. Then he saw the letters. Drafts of emails, meticulously composed, warning Tim about Rachel's alleged infidelities. As he read them, he recognized phrases that mirrored the anonymous messages Tim had received. The box was Pandora's chaos of deceit, false medical records, incriminating drafts, and even a small notebook filled with what seemed like surveillance notes on Rachel. Everything pointed to a meticulously orchestrated plan to stop Tim's wedding and isolate him from the woman he loved. Brian felt a mixture of disbelief and horror. This was intended manipulation on a level he couldn't have imagined, and the mastermind was his wife. Confronting Linda was one of the most challenging things Brian ever had to do. The woman he thought he knew for decades unraveled before his eyes as he presented the irrefutable evidence. Linda tried to justify it, claiming it was all done out of love for Tim, to protect him. But the betrayal cut deep, ripping apart the trust that had held their family together. When Tim learned the truth, he was devastated. His mother, the person who was supposed to love and protect him unconditionally, had manipulated him into breaking off a relationship with the woman he loved. The revelation irreparably damaged his relationship with Linda and left him struggling to pick up the pieces of his emotional life. For Linda, the fallout was both swift and heartbreaking. She lost the trust of her husband and the love of her son, all for an illusion of control that had twisted her passion into something unrecognizable. She was left to ponder the gravity of her actions in the echoing silence of a home that once was filled with the warmth of family. Tim moved out, taking a job in a different city. Brian filed for divorce, unable to reconcile with the woman who had torn their family apart. Years later, as she sat alone in the living room, flipping through old family albums that now felt like relics from another lifetime, Linda couldn't escape the heavy burden of regret. She had driven away the people who mattered most, all because of a toxic possessiveness that she had mistaken for love. It was a painful realization, one that she would carry for the rest of her life, a constant reminder of a family torn apart by the very person who was supposed to hold it together.